GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Welcome to our special Armistice Day coverage on GB News with me, Tom Harwood. We've got a lot to cover this morning. We'll be bringing you the most informative coverage from here in the studio and the latest action from our reporters around the country. And remember, through it all, send us your thoughts and memories at gbviews@gbnews.com. But before all of that, let's get your latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Tom, thank you, and good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. A major police operation has been launched to prevent disorder in London, with pro-Palestinian protesters set to stage their biggest rally to date. Well, hundreds of thousands of people are expected to descend on the capital. Today's march coinciding with Armistice Day. A ring of protection has been established around the cenotaph ahead of a national 2-minute silence, which will be observed at 11 o'clock. Almost 2,000 officers are being deployed across the weekend, with exclusion zones set up to prevent protesters from entering locations where remembrance services are being held. Shadow Defence Minister Luke Pollard says it's right to honour those who served in conflicts and paid the ultimate sacrifice.
It does seem that this year's Armistice Day matters more than the ones in recent years, and that's because war seems closer to the UK than it has done for a very long time. The illegal invasion of Ukraine by Putin and the events in the Middle East mean that the pictures we're seeing on our TV screens at night of the horrors of war really bringing home the sacrifices that generations of Brits have made in support of our country and of British values.
Saudi Arabia is hosting an extraordinary joint Islamic-Arab summit to address the war in the Middle East. Leaders are expected to strongly condemn Israel's bombardment of Gaza and call for an end to the displacement of Palestinians. That's as the humanitarian situation on the Gaza Strip continues to deteriorate. The Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, says operations have been suspended at the Al-Shifa hospital after it ran out of fuel. Israel has reopened an evacuation corridor, allowing civilians to travel from the north to the south of the territory. It also hopes a tactical pause in military operations will encourage more people to evacuate the area around the Jabalia camp. A mother who was found dead by her 2 children in Manchester has been named by police. Perseverance Nakube was found with a single stab injury in Little Hulton near Salford in the early hours of yesterday morning. The 35-year-old was taken to hospital where she later died. Police say a 45-year-old man who fled the scene has been arrested on suspicion of murder and remains in custody. Counter-terror police are investigating a deep-fake video of the London mayor where he appears to suggest pro-Palestinian marchers should take priority over Armistice Day events. Well, a spokesperson for Sadiq Khan said the video has been circulated and amplified on social media by far-right groups. It's feared the clip could further inflame tensions in the capital as the pro-Palestinian march coincides with the anniversary of the end of World War I. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. Now it's back to Tom.
Thank you, Tamsin. Now, of course, it's Armistice Day today, and in just under an hour's time, the nation will fall silent in memory and respect for those who have served in all wars. We reflect on the historical importance of this day and its continued significance. And I'm delighted to be joined first of all in this programme by the historian and author of The Path to Peace, Sir Anthony Seldon. Now, Sir Anthony, you have a letter in The Times today. It talks about the contemporary issues of protests at a time of reflection. And I found one line from it particularly poignant. You say, peace and mutual respect will prevail in the end. Is that your view of how today will go?
Well, let's hope. Let's hope that those people who are going to be protesting do respect the rights of others to reflect on people they knew, their parents, grandparents, maybe siblings, friends who have died in conflict, and for whom today is a very sacred day, as it has been for the last 110 years almost since the guns fell silent on November 11th, 1918. So the group I represent were founded in honour of an idea by a soldier who fought in the First World War called Douglas Gillespie, who had a dream about a path across the whole of no man's land, 1,000 kilometres from Switzerland to the North Sea, and he wanted every man, woman and child anywhere in the world to walk from all sides as a reminder of the horror and tragedy of war from, he said, the silent witnesses, i.e. the dead on both sides. And that path has now been created. It is, we're told, the world's biggest commemorative project. I wrote about it in the book called The Path to Peace. It's called the Western Front Way. And yes, we had planned a silent 1-hour walk in memory of that soldier and the vision over the weekend, but it's had to be abandoned because of the temperature in London this weekend, and we just felt it would be unwise to. But no, we're not going away, and I do believe that the great majority of people in our country want to find common ground with others and to reach out across divides of religion and belief to try and find what we share as human beings together. And that was the vision of this soldier.
Well, let's hope that those commemorative plans can be in place in the future if they can't be this weekend, sadly. Sir Anthony, I do want to ask about the history of Remembrance Day in the United Kingdom. How did this, I suppose, moment of national reflection come about and endure for, as you say, almost 110 years now?
So as the war dragged on, and of course people thought at the beginning it would be over by Christmas 1914, but when it went on through 1915, the Somme in 1916, Passchendaele 1917, people were groping around to try and make sense of it all. And the idea came of silence. It came out of South Africa and came into this country. And the idea came with it of the unknown soldier, somebody who would be a focal point, and their unknownness, their silence, would be therefore speak for all those people who died in the conflict, and in memory of all those whose lives were shattered. Some million soldiers died in the First World War, but 3-4 million had their lives broken because of injury and because of mental damage, shell shock after it. So the idea there, we can see the cenotaph, Edwin Lutyens, the great architect at the beginning of the 20th century. Initially in 1919, the structure you see was made of wood. And the French had the idea first of a national memorial. And so the Prime Minister of the day, Lloyd George, panicked and thought, well, Britain has to do it if France is. So invited the premier architect of the day, Lutyens, to construct a wooden structure, a cenotaph, meaning empty tomb, in the heart of British government, Whitehall. And it proved so popular in 1919 that outpouring of emotion that the decision was taken to erect a permanent memorial, as you see there, and that is the memorial that was up for 1920. The tradition started of all the royal family, the national leaders, meeting there for 2 minutes of silence on the 11th of November. And that was the tradition. It was suspended during the Second World War for a time and then restarted with the added names of all those hundreds of thousands who were slaughtered, died, and maimed in the Second World War and subsequent wars.
It is remarkable that we set up these traditions, we constructed the cenotaph, we started remembering those who died in the war that was supposed to end all wars. And only a few years later, young men were being sent back into Europe, fighting in North Africa, fighting across the world. I suppose that asks a difficult question of remembrance. It asks a difficult question of the United Kingdom's approach to this all. If we're remembering those who have fallen in war, are we too warmongering a society? We have had so many wars following the First World War. Where does that leave us as a society?
So I think today is all about, and I'm head of a school myself, in schools, in communities across the country, the Commonwealth and beyond. People are remembering the fallen, and not in any glorifying sense that is glorifying war, but in a sense of honour and silence and awareness, empathy for the sacrifice. So I think that's important to say. Nothing that is warlike about today's ceremonies all around the country. And I think the big difference with the First and Second World War is the First World War was punitive, we can now say, to Germany. And that Treaty of Versailles engendered a bitterness that blossomed 15 years later with the rise of Hitler in 1933, and 6 years later, the outbreak of the Second World War. And that was a lesson that those people who were thinking about the Second World War and how to have a settlement after it, they didn't fall into that trap. They were concerned to build Germany and to build a democratic Germany. And that is what has happened. So I think for many people, perhaps the lesson is, as Churchill himself, Churchill didn't feel any sense of triumphalism, just a terrible, painful tragedy and empathy about the conclusion of the Second World War. I remember being with somebody who was with him when he heard the news about Hitler being killed in the bunker and taking his life in the bunker. He didn't punch the air in delight. He just went very, very quiet. There is that sense of trying to rebuild with the best of humanity and trying, as this soldier, Douglas Gillespie, with the path of peace, the Western Front Way, was striving to do. Let's find the common ground. Let's respect people who may think differently, who may have different backgrounds, because we as human beings share so much more that we have in common. The love for our children, the desire for peace, the desire to flourish and prosper, than the things that divide us.
Well,
I think that's the lesson of the Second World War.
What a profound note to end this part of the show. Sir Anthony Seldon, thank you so much. Of course, contemporary historian and author of The Path to Peace. Really appreciate your time this morning. Well, let's widen this discussion now. Joining me in the studio throughout the show are Esther McVey MP for Tatton and Philip Davies MP for Shipley. Esther, Phil, great to see you this morning. I found something that Sir Anthony Seldon said there really profound, that this isn't about triumphalism. This is about solemn remembrance. Esther, do you think that sometimes some people get the wrong end of the stick when they see the poppy, when they see Remembrance Day? Some people feel like it is a triumphalist thing, which it's not at all.
They might do, but that's why it's so important to have Remembrance Day. It's only one day out of 365, and it is to remember what happened. It is, as people say, to make sure it doesn't happen again, the use of diplomacy rather than war. All those people who did give their lives so we could be here. That's why I think it's so important. And I think what we don't want on this day, and that's why you've had in a lot of the polls that 50% wanted this march banned, is because people don't want a distraction from that remembrance. They don't want a confusion of what it's about. Protests are more about creating chaos and creating something else, talking about something else. No, we need to remember our fallen. And I think it's really important that we do that. And the longer it is away from the First World War, the more important it is to remember, because I think the human memory is probably 80 years. That is the life expectancy, of the human being, and it really is important we drill that message home.
And it's so much more profound, I suppose. More than 100 years now since the end of the First World War, we're losing that sense of sort of cultural memory that we need to push forward.
The pain isn't as close, and we need to remember that.
Phil, do you think that the government and the police have got it right today in allowing a protest to take place? Yes, after the 11 o'clock silence, and yes, a mile or so away from the cenotaph. But is it right to allow that marching through London for a very, very different sort of set of sensibilities?
No, I think the police have got this wrong. I think the police should have stopped the march from going ahead. Look, I'm all for freedom. I'm all for the freedom to protest as long as it's peacefully. But look, there's a time and a place for everything. It's one weekend a year, as Esther said. It's one time of the year. Surely everybody can put everything aside for one weekend of the year to solemnly remember those people who've sacrificed everything for those freedoms. It's not too much to ask. People can have a protest next week. They've had them the week before and the week before that. I don't really think it's too much to ask that we could just all come together as a country and solemnly remember those people who sacrificed everything for us. And I think the police have got this completely wrong. And I thought when Anthony Seldon said, that the silent walk that was planned has had to be cancelled because of this, that brings home to me how wrong the police have been in making this decision.
No, that is, of course, very, very sad. Did you see the front page of the Daily Mirror yesterday, which was sort of drawing the two issues together? It was saying that we should respect, of course, those who served for the country, but they served for the country to enable us to have the freedoms to perhaps go on distasteful marches. Do you see that point of view?
Yeah, I understand that point of view, and I'm not against people having protests and marches about issues where I disagree with them. That is. But surely, if we want to, reflect on the facts and give praise to those people who defended our freedoms, surely we can spend this weekend solemnly remembering them. We don't need to go on a protest this weekend in order to show that we've got those freedoms. We can do that every other weekend. It's not
Phil,
too much.
Isn't it about balancing freedoms as well? Yes, it's the freedom to march, but it is the freedom for other people to go about their day-to-day life. It is the freedoms that people from the Jewish community shouldn't be frightened and have to stay inside. It is balancing those up. And there is, I would say, if you look, this has been going, as you said, for 110 years. These other protesters, this will be their 5th week of marching. And actually, people have brought into question, well, common decency, understanding, actually, this solemn reflection that is very much of the UK. And I think that's what you do. You balance up all those, and people, that's why people have requested, please don't do it. Please listen to us as well. We're listening to you. We've heard what you said. But no, the protesters are saying what we're protesting about is more important. We want you to hear what we've got to say. And I think that's what we don't like, because that's not a balancing up of freedoms there. That is a dominance of somebody else.
No, I think that's a really profound point. Esther, Phil, we'll be back with you throughout the show, of course. But coming up, the former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, will be joining me to share thoughts on Armistice Day events and, of course, those protests.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to your Armistice Day coverage here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood. We've been looking at ceremonies across the United Kingdom this morning, and we'll be turning to all different corners of the United Kingdom in just a moment. But for now, let's speak to the former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood MP. Tobias, thank you so much for making the time for us here on the 11th of November. I suppose I want to start by broadening this conversation out. So far in the programme, we've spoken a lot about the First World War. We've spoken a bit about the Second World War. But of course, there are veterans from far more recent wars who potentially feel like they're not receiving enough help and support and, frankly, respect from the country as things stand. Are we doing enough for our veterans today?
I think we have a contract with anybody that signs the armed forces, that steps forward and puts the uniform on. They do something quite exceptional for our country, arguably beyond, the call of duty of other walks of life. And we owe them a debt of gratitude once they've packed up their uniform, slid it back across to the quartermaster for the last time, to look after them for the rest of their lives. And sadly, we don't do enough of that. One of the important aspects of the poppy appeal itself is to raise important funds for the Royal British Legion and indeed other charities to support those who may require help, whether mental, physical, or others, and indeed the families as well. So it's important on this special day for us to reflect not just the thanks and the gratitude of those who've worn the uniform in the past, those past sacrifices, rightly in the First and Second World Wars, but also those who've served more recently to make sure that we do provide the necessary support they require, if they require it, now or in the future.
It always shocks me the proportion of homeless people in the United Kingdom who have served for Queen and Country, now King and Country, of course, in the past. Does that show that there's been some sort of failure in terms of support, in terms of not just charitable support, but state support for those who've worn the King's uniform?
You know, Johnny Mercer, the Veterans Minister, and I, prior to that, and other Veterans Ministers have worked very hard to make sure we do provide the necessary support. It's always saddening, disheartening to see somebody who wore the uniform who's then homeless. It's worth stressing that the stats are no worse for anybody in the armed forces who served in the past compared with any other walk of life. We need to make that very, very clear indeed. But you're right, as I go back to my point, we need to go the extra mile. That's why we created the Armed Forces Covenant, a commitment by businesses, by charities, by the government itself to make sure we do look after those who require support. Extra funding has come in, but we can always do more.
It's interesting looking at the state of the British Army right now. There has been perhaps a degradation of its size, a shrinkage of the number of people in our standing army, perhaps a less well-equipped army than we have had in the past. Is that an issue going into the future, going into a very uncertain world with perhaps more acute state threats alive in this decade than at any time since before the fall of the Berlin Wall?
Oh, yes. I think you cover such an important point, and the penny hasn't really dropped. I would actually argue that our armed forces are extremely highly trained, the most professional, the most motivated in the world. Their equipment is second to none. There's simply not enough personnel, and there's not enough equipment for the very point you made. We've entered another dangerous and complex era. We've become complacent since the fall of the Berlin Wall, in fact, and other nations, non-state actors as well as states, are taking advantage of that. I go further to say that this recent conflict in the Middle East is perhaps another flashing light on the international global order dashboard. There are too many flashing lights for the West to compete with, and our adversaries are grouping together, forming alliances, rearming, regrouping. The 1930s all over again. We haven't really woken up to that.
That's a stark warning that perhaps we're not appeasing our enemies, but certainly not having the capacity that were we to see a repeat of the 1930s, heaven forfend, we wouldn't be up to it. What should we be doing in order to bolster our own security here at home?
It's not just about bolstering our own security, which is absolutely important, investing further in our armed forces. We need to move up to 3%, but it's also repairing our international rules-based order. The United Nations is now reaching its League of Nations moment. It's no longer able to hold errant nations to account. Other international forces are grouping together, alliances are regrouping, countries are weaponizing, and the West is lacking a sense of focus, a sense of purpose as to what we believe in, what we stand for, what we're willing to defend. We're doing quite well in Ukraine, but we haven't really put that fire out. And now the Middle East, we're focused on Hamas, I understand that. We're focused on, the Palestinians. What sits behind that is Iran. And Iran has taken advantage of how timid, how risk-averse we've become since the Iraq invasion back in 2003 with its proxy influence. And then we see what China is doing as well, and many countries around the world, particularly what's now called Global South, taking a back seat. I've said this before, but I stress it again. Our world is in danger of splintering into two spheres of competing influence. And it's getting all the more dangerous, all the more reason why, as we respect and pay tribute to past sacrifices, we take a look at what's coming around the corner. We're entering a very dangerous era indeed.
It's fascinating to look at Iran and perhaps this growing, what many people have described as a new axis of evil, the connections between Iran, China, Russia, and to a lesser extent, North Korea. These countries seem to be wanting to influence things in other countries. And I wonder, to what extent has Iran, and of course their funding of terrorist groups that are out to destroy Israel, has that influenced anything in the United Kingdom, do you think? Do we need to be more aware to state interference and perhaps the malign influence it has, not just on our civic life, but our politics too?
Well, we are simply absent of an Iran strategy. We try to appease Iran in the fog of this conflict and indeed in other of their proxy influences. They are pushing forward with their nuclear weapon experiments. They're developing a stronger relationship with Russia. They're actually supporting Russia's efforts in Ukraine. And sitting behind Russia, of course, is China. They're developing a relationship as well. And what is the West doing about it? What is our grand plan? What is our vision to underscore and defend our international rules-based order? And we, as I say, have become too timid, too risk-averse in dealing with these big challenges ahead. And we should recognize that we still have the power to do so, but it takes leadership. It takes a sort of Churchillian statecraft for us to rekindle. We seem to have lost since the end of the Cold War.
Well, Tobias Ellwood, former chair of the Defence Select Committee and, of course, a veteran yourself, thank you so much for making the time for us here on the 11th of November on our special Armistice Day programme. Esther and Phil are still with me. And, Phil, I suppose very often Remembrance Day is about thinking back to the past, but Tobias made an important point about the future there too.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think one of the key things about Armistice Day is not just looking back at what happened, but making sure that never happens again is a key part of it. And, I think Tobias is absolutely right about the state of our defences in this country and how much we probably don't invest enough. I think the money that we invest is not always spent wisely as well. It has to be said. Some of the procurement it goes way over budget and way over time. And so I think the Defence Department need to do much better at spending the money they have. But I think Tobias is right. In the Cold War, yes, there was a real threat there that we were faced up to. But the world, that threat may have gone, but the world is now far more uncertain than it was back then. And therefore, defence of the realm is the first priority of the government. And I think the problem is it might not always be politically convenient. There's not many votes in the short term in putting more money in defence and not putting it in, for example, the NHS or in tax cuts. But actually, we rely on the government to make long-term strategic decisions, which aren't always politically popular. And I think we've lost a bit of that in this country over recent years.
Esther, do you think we're sleepwalking into a new Cold War?
I definitely think the clouds are forming ahead of us. You're quite right. We saw the Russia-Ukraine situation bubble up, and from there, as the West stood back and said, we're going to stand with Ukraine and not Russia, and we're actually going to make sure we alienate them, what you saw is this new grouping coming together. So you saw China coming over to Russia, you saw Iran coming over to Russia, you've seen Pakistan and the sort of African emerging states, and I thought that's made a new divide, a new team of sort of two groups of people in this sort of political time, and I think we need to be alert to that. That's why, really, when you looked at what happened in Gaza, when you looked at the Palestine Israeli situation, you look at what Hamas did, that started off a war in a region, but actually it caused civil disobedience and unrest and ethnic unhappiness in every country around the world. So this is where you've got the complications. It's not what's happening elsewhere, it's what bubbled up inside. And then when you see today, one of the organisers of the groups creating supposedly this March for Peace is Mohammed Sawala, who was one of the Hamas leaders in the West Bank. So you're saying this is a March for Peace, but actually who are the groups bringing this march march forward. And I think we're not understanding all of this. It is very complicated. These are the new divides in the world, but it's playing out on our streets in the UK.
And I think we should say that a lot of people on these marches would say that they denounce Hamas, but I think it's absolutely clear, as you point out, there are lots of people on these marches who perhaps support Hamas or even were part of Hamas too. It's a
well, the Muslim Association
situation
of Britain is organised by, as I had said, by Mohammed Swahala, who was a founder of the Hamas on the West Bank.
No, deeply, deeply concerning. Well, Esther, Phil, I know you'll be here on the sofa throughout the programme, and indeed, coming up, we'll be bringing you all the latest coverage from around the UK and, of course, all corners of the United Kingdom as we head towards that 2 minutes of silence at 11 a.m. We're looking at live pictures of Rochdale at the moment and the cenotaph in that town.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
A very warm welcome back to our continued Armistice Day coverage with me, Tom Harwood, here on GB News. Now, of course, in just under 20 minutes' time, the nation will fall silent in memory and respect for those who have served in wars across the United Kingdom. And we'll be covering these events right around the country. Olivia Utley, our political correspondent, is in Westminster. Sophie Reaper is in Rochdale. Jack Carson is at the National Arboretum. And Doogie Beattie is in Belfast. Well, let's go to you first, Olivia. What are we expecting to see at the heart of London today?
Yes, I'm here at the Cenotaph. At 11 o'clock today, there will be a ceremony organised by the Western Front Association. I'm not sure if you can see, but there are already crowds gathering on Whitehall behind me. The police presence is huge. The police clearly are not taking any risks today. There's a ring of steel, as they call it, around the Cenotaph, a ring of policemen. Also down on Parliament Square, there is a ring of steel around the Churchill statue. The hope and expectation is that the pro-Palestine marches, which are set to begin at 12 o'clock, they've been given a prescribed route which is set to avoid Whitehall and the Cenotaph. And we're expecting the event today at the Cenotaph, the Remembrance event, to finish at 12 o'clock. So Mark Rowley, the head of the Met, is certain, seems convinced that these two events will not run into each other. There'll be a dignified event today at the Cenotaph, the march later on, and no reaction between the two. If anything does kick off a little bit later, then there is going to be huge political scrutiny on the Prime Minister, on the Home Secretary, and on Mark Rowley next week. But at the moment, we are all waiting for 11 o'clock for the minute's silence we will have here. There'll be a laying of wreaths. There'll be representatives from the cadets of the Army, the Navy, and the RAF here. There will be the last post will be played by a bugler. It's set to be a really beautiful event, and let's just hope that the rest of the day passes off in as dignified a manner.
And Olivia, just to stick with you for a second, what's the mood amongst the crowd there? It looks quite busy from where we can see.
It is very busy here. The mood here, from what I can see, everyone is just waiting in pretty respectful silence, mostly, for the 11 o'clock silence. A little bit further up Whitehall, there's quite a noisy group of, we think it's football fans. There's lots of St George's flags back behind me, but police have told me that they're expecting that to quieten down come 11 o'clock. At the moment, there is absolutely no sign at all of any pro-Palestinian marchers who, as I say, aren't set to take off until 12 o'clock today.
Good news. Thank you very much, Olivia, there from the Cenotaph on Whitehall. Let's cross now to Rochdale, where Sophie Reaper is reporting. And Sophie, Rochdale's Cenotaph this week holds a pretty special significance, but perhaps for the wrong reasons.
Yes, indeed, Tom. There has been quite a controversy here in Rochdale in the last week or so. But as we approach 11 o'clock, there are dozens of people already gathered here around the Cenotaph, people proudly wearing their poppies, some of them bringing wreaths to lay on the Cenotaph here behind me, people wearing military uniform. One gentleman even laid a Union Jack on the Cenotaph a little bit earlier on. But that feeling of country pride there is a feeling of what has been going on here this week, because Greater Manchester Police are still present. There are, I would say, around 8 to 10 GMP officers present here at the Cenotaph, ensuring that those incidents that have happened this week, things like graffiti on the Cenotaph, that those kind of things are not able to happen again, whilst people take in the moments of silence which will be happening shortly, and as well just taking those moments of reflection to remember our fallen veterans here today.
Well, Sophie, it's just so sad that it's necessary to have those police guarding that Cenotaph. We'll be back with you later in the programme. Let's cross to Jack Carson now at the National... let's cross to Doogie Beattie, I apologise, who is in Belfast for us. And Doogie, does the sense of... I suppose division in Northern Ireland feed into this, or is this day in Northern Ireland something that all communities can get behind?
Well, Tom, it is a very complicated relationship with the Poppy Day in Northern Ireland. But of course, people have to remember that at the end of the First World War, Ireland was still as one and part of the United Kingdom. There wasn't one village in the whole of Ireland, north or south, that didn't lose someone in that particular conflict. And it is remembered quite well here. Remembrance Day is very, very important to the veterans here, although, as I say, there is a complicated relationship on a community basis. Even today, there was meant to be a protest here with the Palestine organisers, but there is a very light touch policing here at this moment in time, and it's been a challenge for the new Chief Constable John Boucher, who only came into place earlier on this week. And you can see the light touch in front of me, but if you go off the side streets here in Belfast, you will find snatched Land Rovers and the TSG ready to get into action very, very quickly. And unfortunately, that has been a way of life in Northern Ireland for many, many years. And let's not forget that the Poppy Day itself in 1987 was the victim of an IRA bomb in Enniskillen that killed 12 people. So that relationship continues. But today, here in Belfast, the crowds are now gathering, and those that served and those that are related to those that served are here. But when you stand here and you look at the silence and you look down in amongst the crowd, you can tell who seen action and who didn't, because in that split moment of time you can see most of them men going back to where they were and the reflection inside them. It is a group activity, if you like, Remembrance, but in a lot of ways, Tom, it is a very, very personal thing.
Oh, Dougie, thank you for that. Really, really profound, I suppose, to think of those who have served and what they go through at that moment. Let's cross now to Jack Carson at the National Arboretum. And Jack, what is going on there?
Yeah, good morning to you, Tom. So we're not far away from the start of the service here. You can probably hear the British Army Band playing a beautiful piece of music in the background as the guests have taken their seats and are ready for the start of this service in just 5 minutes' time. We are going to be expecting Her Royal Highness the Royal Princess Anne to join us for the service today. She's representing the royal family here today, laying that wreath, of course, after 11 o'clock, taking part in that silence. And what's particularly poignant about where this service is taking place today here at the Armed Forces Memorial at the National Memorial Arboretum is that there are over 16,000 names inscribed on the walls, all of them of people who died and gave the ultimate sacrifice to this country after the end of the Second World War. And what's particularly poignant is when you walk around the corner of this memorial and you see the names still being inscribed every month, of course, under 2023. It's that reminder on days like this that while Remembrance is traditionally, of course, remembering those who gave their lives in World War I and World War II, so much since that, and since, of course, the British Legion formed, it's all about remembering those every year who give the ultimate sacrifice. At 11 o'clock, because of the way the memorial is designed here, what we'll see is through a gap in the wall, the light exactly at 11 o'clock on the 11th day of the 11th month will shine in the centre of that wreath. It's a moment which brings tears, frankly, to a lot of people's eyes, and particularly with the crowd here, with so many of them, of course, here gathered as the special guests being veterans themselves. So, as Dougie was mentioning, a lot of Remembrance, particularly today, is all about those personal experiences and those personal memories, but we're not too far away from the service starting here.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for that. It's been really, really beautiful to see the ceremony starting up, I suppose, and to see all of the different elements of that. And it's been very, very good to speak to all of our reporters around the country as well. We're getting up to just 10 minutes away now from the 2-minute silence. And we're going to turn to our guests in the studio, because I've been joined by Rafe Haydel-Mankoo, who, of course, is a historian, GB News regular, of course, and Esther and Phil are still with me too. Rafe, how did this silence start? How did we come to associate a 2-minute silence with the act of remembering and Remembrance itself?
Well, the 2-minute silence actually predates the ceremony that we're going to see shortly, predates the cenotaph even. It actually goes back to South Africa in 1918 in Cape Town, where it was first marked. And the idea of the 2-minute silence was at the first minute you would remember those who have returned home, and the second minute would be to remember those who didn't return, the fallen. But it wasn't until an Australian living in London wrote to the press here and broached the idea of remembrance that it took over in this country. And the King was gung-ho behind it, King George V, who said that the entire nation should have no work, no sound, no locomotion, so that all minds can be concentrated on reverent remembrance of our glorious dead. And the first silence was held at Buckingham Palace, which is where the very first Armistice Day ceremony took place in 1919. And the structure we're going to see today of the 2-minute silence, I think it's important to note. We have the famous last post normally sounded. We may not hear it today, but always normally you have the last post to start off with. That used to be sounded in order to mark the sense that it was the end of the day, the garrison was secure, but it was also a bugle call to the wounded in the battlefield or those who were lost to help them find their way home. And so symbolically, it's a way to summon the spirits of the dead to the cenotaph, to the empty tomb. You then get that 2-minute silence where we revere our fallen, after which you have the rouse, which is essentially in the morning the bugle call to get soldiers out of the bed. You have the réveillé to wake them up, and then the rouse to get them out of bed. And that again symbolises the Christian idea of Judgment Day, when the living and the dead will rise up together in harmony and descend. And the structure of that also replicates the night vigil, the 2-minute silence. In the old days, there would be a vigil over the dead in case they were just in a coma, or if they were unconscious, they might actually not be dead. So that night vigil, we are symbolically replicating through this 2-minute silence, and it's our way of saying we are guarding, we are honouring, and we are protecting the dead.
I suppose that royal instigation of this ceremony, of this silence, I suppose that's why this is a Commonwealth-wide event. The origin, as you mentioned, in South Africa, but of course in Australia, in Canada, in many other parts of the Commonwealth, this is a very important day as well.
That's right, it's a terrifically important day. It was after the Second World War that the name changed from Armistice Day to Remembrance Day, because, of course, we were remembering many more than just those who fell in the Great War. Now, uniquely, Britain marks 2 different dates. We have Armistice Day, Remembrance Day today, but then we also have Remembrance Sunday. In Canada, Australia, and elsewhere, everything is held on the 11th of the 11th. But we changed things because in the Second World War, every hour and every minute was so important to the war effort that we couldn't risk wasting a day or spending a day not in the factories, not building munitions. And so the decision was made to have it on a Sunday. And that's why we have this unique tradition of actually marking remembrance on 2 different days. But you're quite right, it's still a vitally important day. And of course, also in France, it's a national holiday. In America, it's known as Veterans Day too. And the King was also spearheading the idea of the cenotaph very much as well, along with David Lloyd George. And it was on this day in 1920 that the cenotaph was unveiled, at the same time that the tomb of the unknown warrior was also created. And in fact, the unknown soldier from France was put into a gun carriage with a coffin draped in the Union flag, and that was led to the cenotaph, where the King pressed a button and the Union flags draping the cenotaph fell to the ground, and he then processed with the gun carriage to Westminster Abbey for the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior. So it's on this day that those 2 most significant and most sacred of our remembrance icons were created.
And I suppose that the unknown soldier is such a profound idea. It's always struck me when I've visited graves of First and Second World War soldiers, just how many of those graves don't have names on them, or they just say a soldier or an airman. Esther, how important is it that we have this sort of sense of symbolism, that unknown soldier could be the person that one family sort of knows is lost, but we never found the body of?
When there were the millions of people who died in World War I and World War II, there'll be so many people that nobody would have been able to have claimed as their own. So that is a symbol that could have been my son, that could have been my grandson, because I never got anything returned from that person. I didn't know. So to be able to go somewhere that's quite sacred, to say, I see that as my child, I can take a moment to reflect because I don't have anything tangible to hold on to. I think that is so poignant and so necessary, because so many people were left with nothing.
And of course, Phil, this ceremony began after the First World War, but it's become to mean so much more, because, of course, people continue to fight and die for this country in wars around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it gives an opportunity for families to give thanks to their relatives who are all currently serving and maybe posted abroad and that they don't see. And I think it brings lots of people together and remembering different people, different events throughout history. I think the other thing as well, which struck me, I've been an MP for Shipley since 2005, and obviously, you know, tomorrow I'll be at Bingley and Baildon in my constituency at their ceremonies. I've actually noticed each year since I've been the MP, more and more people attending the ceremonies at the cenotaph in the towns, and I always think that's terrific, that even as time goes on from World War I and World War II,
and there was
actually
a big
more
shift
and more people
after
are
Iraq,
attending.
wasn't there? There was a big shift after certain occasions, absolutely.
I think that's such an important point, because actually, in a way, as Britain's become more secular and as our religious festivals have become less important, people don't celebrate Easter or Christmas, Remembrance Day, Armistice Day and Remembrance Sunday have become acts of civic religion, and they've become much more sacred and important. That's why emotions are running so high today about these protests, because it's almost as if this is one of our two holy days.
That's a really interesting point, because, of course, I suppose a lot of people think of Christmas as about, you know, family, celebrations, joy, levity, not so much about solemnity or quiet reflection. I suppose it is the only day in the calendar, really, this
and I
weekend.
think that's why it's upset people so much, that this would have been the 5th week now of the protest. They've done it every week, whereas this to us is a one-off special occasion, and that's why people have said, please respect it. It means a lot to us. It's not about noise and shouting, smoke, what are they called? Smoke flares or anything like that. Nothing about that. This is about standing quiet and reflecting. And I loved what were the 2 minutes for? It was the minute for those who returned and a minute for those who didn't. It was calling the dead back to the cenotaph. Maybe people don't know enough about what it is. Maybe that needs to be taught a little bit more in school. What was that all about? To make sure that it does become, which it is, one of our sacred days.
Now, we're 4 minutes away from the silence now, and I just wanted to reflect on, Phil, what you were mentioning there about the growing, I suppose, support for this occasion. That's something that you don't often hear. If you were sort of just to watch the news or read the newspapers, you might think that this is a tradition that's going away, poppy sellers feeling intimidated, all the rest of it. But actually, sort of out there in the country, there is a real sense of how important this ceremony is.
Yeah, it's certainly, my experience is that it's growing in the number of people who go. I think the schools all get involved in the Remembrance Sunday the church services and
all the cadets
and exactly the ceremony that goes on at the cenotaph. So I think the community really comes together from all generations. And like I say, it's just my observation that more and more people are attending now than when I first became the MP in 2005.
And I bet people won't know how many remembrance services there are in a constituency or a patch. There are very many.
Yes,
There's not
absolutely.
one. I could have 20 tomorrow, of which I can only go to a couple of them. There are many right across people's constituencies.
Yeah, every village. I mean, every village in my constituency has their own. I go to the main ones in the main towns, but every village will have their own ceremony.
No, and I suppose it is remarkable. Every town, village in the country, it seems, has a point where you can remember, has a war memorial of some sort.
Well, that's a good point, actually, because prior to the Great War in the 20th century, we didn't have those. The country only built memorials for victory. And for great heroes. There was nothing for the common man. There was no memorial for people to actually pay tribute to the fallen. And in the Great War, the decision was made not to repatriate bodies. And actually, so many bodies were completely destroyed and so many were unidentifiable that there was nothing at home for people to actually, a spot for them to pay their respects. And that's why you had this profusion of war memorials in every village, every hamlet, every town, and every city, a place for the nation to come together. And so it's a very recent creation that we have this whole concept of remembrance.
That is so interesting. I should just mark we're less than 2 minutes away from the silence now, but this idea that it's something that is so national, so important, but also so introspective and personal. It's almost a moment of contrasts in that way, Esther.
Yes, so when the bugle does play, I and everybody there find that deeply emotional. I think then when the cannon sounds or the firework goes off, again, all of these things mark a moment in time, and all of them pulls on with the different sounds, the different feelings, the prayers, the poems, pull on a different emotion within you. It is spine-tingling to be at one of these services.
And the thing that strikes me is that you would think after a big war that people might celebrate a victory in a war, that, you know, we defeated Germany. But actually, you don't get any of that on Remembrance Sunday. It is very, very solemn occasion. There's no sense of celebration or anything like that. As Rafe said about memorials there for victories. It's one day. It is pure solemn silence and remembrance, and it's very striking. There is no element of celebration at all.
Well, it's only 20 seconds now until the silence, so I think we should take a pause there and just perhaps reflect on what we might be thinking about during this silence. If we know people who have served, if we have family members who have fallen in previous wars, perhaps now is a moment to think of them and think of those who've fought for our nation. And there we have it as the crowds in Whitehall erupt into spontaneous applause there. We've also seen ceremonies around the country take place, and I'm still with Esther, Phil and Rafe. And Rafe, as we were saying, this isn't just something that happens in London. This is happening right across the country, some ceremonies big, some small, all quiet, all solemn.
Absolutely. The 11th hour now, and also tomorrow, we remember the sacrifice, we remember the blood, sweat and tears that were spilled to secure our liberties. And, you know, we remember the lost dreams of those young soldiers who gave their today for our tomorrow. And the liberties we all enjoy were secured at a very high price, and I think it's the least we can do to spend 2 minutes to reflect on all of that. And I'm not sure, maybe my mind is fading these days, but I don't think I've ever heard a round of applause before.
We looked at each other and said the same thing.
After that, I think the emotions are so high on this occasion particularly that I think you're really seeing this is a show of support from, dare I say, the great silent majority, saying we're here, we want to be counted, this is an important day.
Yes, I think there was pride in that applause. I think there was maybe relief in that applause. It is, we are standing with you in that, but that spontaneity there, it was like a pop coming out, a cork coming out of a bottle, but we felt it was positive, wasn't it? Yes. It was positive celebration in remembering our fallen.
And it was respectful. There wasn't whooping. There wasn't anything, dare I say it, gauche. There was a moment that was reflected, marked, and then moved on from.
But Tom, the whole thing's like that. I was just looking at people stood there. Everybody's come out in their best coat. You know, the military, of course, they look precise and immaculate with their medals on. But everybody else there holding, whether it is a wreath or whether they're wearing a poppy, the deferential element of it, the silence of it. I think that how dignified it is, and military precision in absolutely everything that goes on, again, is something our country does so well. 11 o'clock, the clock chiming, the bugles playing, the silence falling upon a nation. That is very British.
Now, Rafe, of course, tomorrow we're going to see a ceremony where the King, the leaders of major parties, politicians take part in. What's the difference between that and what we've just seen today?
Well, what we've seen today really is an informal marking of the occasion. In fact, King George V, when he actually first spoke about this, said he didn't want there to be any clear organisation necessarily beyond these. Everybody, wherever you are, on the street. And that very first Armistice Day was magical, how the traffic stopped in the streets, motor cars stopped, horses stopped, people took off their hats. And it's the idea of the free will of the people to actually demonstrate their own support for this. Tomorrow is, of course, the day for the grand occasion, where we'll see the King and, as you say, all of the government, all of the High Commissioners and the ambassadors giving the formal, official and diplomatic honour to the war dead.
It's interesting, Phil, I suppose, to some extent, that formal occasion tomorrow, today is perhaps more local, but more of the people, perhaps?
Yeah, I think different towns do it differently. I think in some towns still on the 11th, they still have quite a big event on the 11th, whereas other towns sort of focus everything on Remembrance Sunday. So I think it is sort of a slightly horses for courses event. But I think what Rafe mentioned there about, you know, the traffic stopping and everything, you do see that tomorrow. You know, the police will close the roads in town so that the parade can go down from a point in a particular town to the cenotaph. The traffic will stop. People will get out of their cars and join in the remembrance process. And you know, you will get spontaneous rounds of applause as the parade goes down the town towards the cenotaph. It is very a moving occasion.
Esther, is there a worry now today? And apologies for bringing this sort of, I suppose, back to reality. We know that there will be a protest in less than an hour's time. Is there a worry that people will think, right, that's it, we've had the respect, that's over now, and the mood will shift in London?
Well, all I can say, let's hope not. That's what we don't want to happen. You still need to respect the day. That's what it's about. Yes, this specific hour, but it's a whole day, actually. And I think that would be wrong for anybody to think, oh, we've gone past that moment now, it's time. Mars. And the difference, as I said, between that solemnity, that how dignified that was, what we've just watched, that silence there, to then the protests, the sort of the screaming, the noise, the flags, the smoke flares, all that, the difference. No, they must remember what this is about. And I think it would be up to them how they want today remembered. That anybody goes on that protest or march must do it in a way that they don't get a backlash should they show disrespect. We've seen 188 arrests so far over the last 4 weeks. We don't want to see any more, and we certainly don't want any disrespect shown, because people are waiting for it. People are waiting for that to happen, and they will say, how could you do that to us on our most sacred of days?
I mean, we should be grateful that nothing interfered with that down Whitehall, you know, so that's very good news, and I think we're all grateful for that. I think, you know, there clearly is a risk for the rest of the day. Quite clearly there's a risk. I mean, this is, you know, the police didn't cancel the protest because they said there wasn't sufficient intelligence that there would be disorder. But look, police officers have been drafted in from all around the country today. The police officers from West Yorkshire,
2,000,
who would have been serving in West Yorkshire today, are down in London.
Well, why don't we cross now live to the site of the protest, where our Home and Security editor Mark White joins us. And Mark, the protest is not yet beginning, but I suppose people must be gathering.
Yes, absolutely. Hundreds already gathering here up in Marble Arch for the start of the protest march, which will, of course, begin from Hyde Park, go down Park Lane to Hyde Park Corner, and then make its way across Vauxhall Bridge and to the US Embassy. And it's got to be hoped, of course, that people stick to that route. Listen, there's one issue, of course, about whether this march, on the timing that it's taking place of today, whether that's disrespectful. That's one thing and one argument. The other issue is whether this march is going to be violent. And I think the vast majority, we can say with certainty, the vast majority of people that will be on this march will not be in any way violent, will not be interested in making life difficult for the police or their surrounds. But it only ever takes a couple of hundred idiots to cause some real issues. I just want to give you a shot down there. You can see actually just some of the police who are here. Now, these are just some of the smaller police carriers, the police vans, just for the officers that are here. What you're not seeing are the officers who are in the side streets, in the larger carriers en masse, dozens of carriers all around this way. We know there's up to 2,000 officers that are on duty for this protest today, and the hope is that they won't have to be called in to action in terms of their public order tactics. You can see the marchers here gathering. This is just in the square at Marble Arch, and they're crossing in groups every time that the traffic lights change to get across into that main assembly point in Hyde Park with their Palestinian flags. They want to be here, of course, to voice their concerns about the horrific scenes that are unfolding in Gaza. That's perfectly legitimate to voice those concerns for the innocent members of the public in Gaza. But again, you know, we go to the point, should this be happening on, you know, such a solemn and dignified day as Armistice Day here in London? You know, people will have opinions one way or the other on that. Now we're past at least that point of Armistice being remembered. We just have to hope that the march itself does not lead to those that may be intent on causing trouble, breaking off and confronting the police, or indeed that counter-protest that is underway down around the Cenotaph.
And Mark, as you mentioned, that risk, the risk is of people breaking off from the official route. You mentioned that police officers, some of those almost 2,000 police officers, are in side streets. Is that intending to make sure that this route stays on its route, to make sure that people don't veer towards Whitehall or veer towards the Cenotaph?
No, it's really all about proportionate policing. So you'll have officers there. There will be a visible presence of those officers, and they'll march along with the marchers down there. But of course, the others really are just in reserve. The hope is that they won't actually be called into action, but they're in side streets because they're just there, the nearest available area to where the march is. And those, you'll hear sirens all the time, and what that is, you know, 3, 4, half a dozen of these police carriers, these large police vans, repositioning, going to a different area to sort of meet the march when it's there. So the reason they're in side streets is just keep out of the way. What they don't want to do is kind of provoke people into violence. There'll be enough officers here in terms of a visible presence, but if they require the public order teams who are trained to deal with any outbreaks of disorder, then they will rush to the scene from these side streets just nearby.
And Mark, just finally, give us a sense of timings for this protest. When are things expecting to move?
Well, they're always a bit fluid because it really just depends how organised the organisers are. I've been on many marches over the years. We're told 12:45. Well, let's see if they actually do get off at that time, or perhaps with people still arriving, it just takes a little bit longer. But 12:45, 1 o'clock, they're going to be, I would imagine, underway, or at least getting underway to head down on what is a 3-mile march down to the US Embassy. Then they've been given till about 5 p.m. this evening to start dispersing, and that, of course, as we've known from previous protests, can be when there is trouble, when that hardcore that might be bent on trouble don't want to disperse and really just want to stay and be abusive towards the police and have a go, basically.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for that. We know we'll be back with you throughout the day, and let's hope that this march remains peaceful. Well, Esther and Phil are still with me here in the studio, but I'm also joined by the former Labour MP, Simon Danchuk. And Simon, I suppose we can all be thankful with how the 2-minute silence went. I think it was quite a profound moment.
Yes, no, absolutely. It's a very solemn occasion, a very important day for the whole of Britain, and the vast majority of the public in the UK will be pleased to have seen it go off nicely and calmly.
Just looking there at the gathering around Marble Arch, it doesn't look like there are a lot of people there yet. The start time, I suppose, is 12, so perhaps that will grow. Do you get a sense that perhaps this won't be the 500,000 person march that some organisers have sort of trumpeted it up to be?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will have been respectful and decided to stay away and listen to the debate that's taken place over the last week, and concluded that the sensible thing is to give the wider British public that opportunity to reflect and remember those that have died on behalf of our country. So my concern is that the people who do turn up, and I think you're right, it's going to be smaller numbers, might be more troublesome and more difficult, and we'll only see whether that is the case as the day goes on.
And I suppose, Phil, the risk is perhaps not at this time of day, but as things get a bit later in the day, perhaps as the sun goes down, different groups might meet each other, and I suppose that's where the security risk comes.
Yeah, without a doubt. There clearly is a huge risk of disorder. I mean, I don't think anybody can deny that. And if there wasn't, they wouldn't have been drafting police officers in from all around the country to assist. The police must know that there is a huge risk of disorder. But look, I think because they know that, it makes they can be better prepared for it. And I think that's usually the problem occurs when something kicks off and nobody was prepared for it. That's when you get the biggest issue. So hopefully the police are very well prepared and can nip anything in the bud. But that risk is certainly there today.
Esther, do you think that we've prepared enough, that the government has prepared enough for this day, that the Metropolitan Police, frankly, have prepared enough?
Well, we can only hope they have. As you said, they've brought everybody in, the Gold Commanders there, absolutely. I think what was interesting interesting. You're quite right. We haven't seen too many people gathered yet for the protest. However, following all the news and the information and the intelligence yesterday, it seemed all the coach companies were actually booked out. You couldn't get a place on anything to come down. They were saying, and the organisers were saying, they did have those numbers. They were here, and you couldn't actually find another spare place to come here. So it'll be interesting to see what time they do arrive. Maybe they've had difficulties getting into town as well. Maybe that wall of fire, or wall of steel, I should say, went further out and has protected them. But as Simon says, if only the most militant ones have come into town to make their case and protest, then that is the most difficult to police. But the numbers of police then are sufficiently higher in proportion.
I think we can safely say that the police will be well prepared, because remember, Mark Rowley made this big call not to cancel it. If everything kicked off, his position would be probably untenable, having made that decision. So I think we can safely say that the police will be prepared like they've never been prepared before for an event, because his entire future hangs on today.
Well, let's just have a look at live pictures now of some of these protesters gathering. I believe we can have a look at these pictures now. It does look sparse as things stand. For those listening on radio, we can see people waving big Palestinian flags. There's a couple of tents that have been erected, flags, placards, but fairly sparse as things stand. And as I say, this is 40 minutes before the official start time, so perhaps things will grow. But Simon Danchuk, we have seen some disorder around the country in the last 7 days. There were small skirmishes on Whitehall last weekend, and of course in Rochdale we saw some wanton vandalism of the cenotaph.
Yeah, I used to be the AMP for Rochdale, so I know it incredibly well. The vast majority of people in Rochdale are very proud of their armed forces. There's a very small minority of people there who don't like Britain, quite literally, who are opposed to our military forces and opposed to British foreign policy abroad. And they are making themselves known, as they have done in Rochdale over this last week. That will be condemned by the vast majority of people in Rochdale. I'm pleased to say it looks like the council's got a good grip of it. The Greater Manchester Police have been keeping an eye on things, and they've made arrests apparently. So that's good to know. I mean, the final point there is that the local Labour MP there is calling for a ceasefire, which is contrary to what Keir Starmer is calling for, and indeed the position of the whole country in terms of government.
That is an interesting point. We're looking at live pictures of Rochdale now. It does look like it is going off very, very smoothly, this ceremony. Everyone looks incredibly smart, and I believe that is a part of the cenotaph behind those members of the armed forces, which is looking resplendent, frankly. It's gleaming in the sunshine, and that graffiti has all been cleared off.
Oh, and it's a really special place in Rochdale. It's very much at the centre of the town. It's directly in front of the town hall, which is a great 1800s building, and people are very as Philip were talking about, people are very solemn about that particular place, and it's an important place for remembrance. And I know the people who cleaned it soon after the graffiti appeared, people take a lot of pride in that particular part of the town.
It may well encourage more people to attend the ceremony today and tomorrow, I guess, in Rochdale, Simon.
Yeah, and you were making the point earlier, Phil, that more people have been turning out for these occasions. It is a very big occasion in Rochdale. More and more people have turned out. The most important day of the year in Rochdale, I would say.
Wow. And I suppose, Esther, perhaps this one's to you. There is this sense, I suppose, that there is a greater silent majority than there is a loud minority on these issues.
Oh, absolutely there is, and sometimes you want that silent majority to stand up and make a stance, rather than letting that very vocal minority take over the news, the headlines, the social media, and actually that isn't what most people are thinking. The other thing I'm pleased to hear, or I'm understanding today, the police are going to be quicker to make arrests than what they've done on the last 4 weeks, where they've sort of policed in hindsight.
Esther, I'm just hearing in my ear that there have been some reports reports of scuffles with the police from these protesters. We don't have a full picture yet. It doesn't sound like it was a major incident, but some reports of scuffles. As we can get more information, we will, of course, bring it to you. But I suppose that does speak to sort of a few bad apples rather than an overriding sense that there is a deep division in this country.
And I think this is what the public were calling for all along. They wanted police quick to act, to stop it straight away, not this policing in hindsight, getting the footage, referring to if it was fine. You know, they've got the laws causing harassment, alarm and distress by threatening, abusive, insulting words or behaviour. They've got that, and now I believe today they're going to be using that more forcefully.
Simon, do you think that there is a sense that the police now are going to be acting more forcefully, doing things faster? Is that well understood? And to some extent, has the political row this week and all the controversy around the Home Secretary and the meeting of the Prime Minister and the head of the Met and all the rest of it, has that influenced this?
Well, I hope it has. The broader public want the police to act. They've been very much behind the curve on this issue, there's no doubt about it, as they were on the Just Stop Oil protesters. They were behind the curve on that, rarely made arrests. These protesters have learnt from the Just Stop Oil protesters, so they've been filling up train stations, stopping people from going about their business. It's just not acceptable. If they'd made arrests earlier on, then the protests would have been much calmer and much more civilised. Now they're on the back foot, and let's see how they do today.
It's interesting, this, isn't it? Because the police didn't intervene in the past because they said that, you know, that would cause more protests, cause more violence, and it would escalate the problems when it happened. That's why they did it retrospectively. So if they are making a change in policy today to be more proactive, it will be interesting to see whether or not their initial view is true, that actually it does escalate the violence, or whether it does actually nip it in the bud. It will be interesting to see that.
And what's your view on that, Esther? Do you think that, to some extent, more proactive policing can actually keep things calmer, quite to the contrary of what the protesters have been saying?
I think people need to know where the police draw the line. There's no ifs or buts, there's no sort of, oh, we can overstep, we can overreach them. No, this is what will happen should you do this, that, the other. And I don't think the police were clear enough in what they do, and that allows people to push the boundaries, which is what we've seen.
Yeah. Do you think there's a sense that there's a political taboo about politicians saying the police should do this, the police shouldn't do that? There's all this talk about operational independence, but I suppose to some extent there was a political consensus to criticise the police when it came to their handling of the Sarah Everard vigil. But when it comes to the police in other occasions, it seems like politicians can't criticise them. Is there an inconsistency there?
I think there is an inconsistency, and I think Suella Braverman has been right to call it out. And there is a view in the country that the police are tough on some protesters and weak and light on other protesters, and I think she's right to call it out. I have no doubt on that.
The thing is, there's a difference, isn't there, between operational independence and being able to comment on it. We all accept that the police are operationally independent. We all accept that the courts have a separation of powers from Parliament. That doesn't mean to say that we don't have the right to have our own opinion and to say to the police, we don't think you're doing this right, or to say to the courts, we think that was a really poor decision that you made. But we're all within our rights to do that. Things that are the responsibility of Parliament. Doesn't mean to say nobody can criticise what we do.
Does the Home Secretary have a special responsibility to be more reserved in that setting, given that the police do report
I think 10, 15, 20 years ago it would have been radically different. I cannot imagine David Blunkett or John Reid, when they were Home Secretary, being criticised for doing what Suella Braverman's done. And it's not a party political issue, but I think Blunkett would have said to the Met Chief Constable, sort this out. I don't want this protest going ahead. And they would have listened to him. Why are we in a different time now?
At the end of the day, it's the politicians who get the abuse. Not, you know, so they're perfectly entitled to have their say.
Well, we'll return to this conversation in a moment, but of course across the weekend we'll be hearing stories from GB News viewers, remembering those lost in the Great War and at every war since. But it's not just about those, it's also about those who have survived, of course, many with wounds, physical and mental, and many destined to replay those memories for as long as they live. Let's cross now to our London reporter, Lisa Hartle, who's at Lancaster Gate with a veteran.
Yes, I'm joined with John Dennett. He's a World War II veteran, as well as Jim from the London Taxi Charity. John, thank you so much for joining us today. So just to tell everyone about your story, you were 17 years old when you first joined up with the Royal Navy as a gunner, and your mum hid your birth certificate so you couldn't join, didn't she?
Well, when she learned I joined the Navy, she said, "You cannot go." And my dad said, "It'll do him good." And so she hid the birth certificate, which at the time she must have thought I couldn't get in without it. Anyhow, I did go to the war as it happened. Me and my friend, 3 weeks after we'd gone down to Bristol and joined, or they took us in the Navy. And my mum wouldn't let me have my birth certificate. So away I go, and when we land up at the barracks where we had to do our training, I don't think they were all that worried about birth certificates. They were more concerned in your health and how many bad teeth you had, because that was the first thing we did. They give you a strip-in back inspection, get dressed, and then look in your mouth. So many bad teeth, out they come. And that was my start to the Navy. So I didn't have to worry about my birth certificate in the end.
So, John, you were so young when you joined. You were a gunner in the Royal Navy.
Say young.
17, that's so
Yeah,
young.
well,
What made you
17
join?
At that time, you were on the way to manhood, weren't you? Like, we left school at 14, and you're 3 years into being a man. It's different than today. At 17, you just go into your secondary education, and you know, that sort of thing. Well, I was working with my father, and I was training to be an apprentice bricklayer. And the firm we worked for was building air raid shelters, camps, all that sort of thing. Because of the military, we were getting called up. And 1941 this was, and the winter was one of those severe winters when everything froze up and all the building come to a stop above ground. And in Corsham, which is a little village further up from where I was brought up, there were underground caves left where they'd taken the Bath and Portland stone out of, and they were building underground factories to store ammunition and all that sort of stuff.
I remember reading about this, John, because you were so surprised having to work underground before. But can I just ask you, you took part in 4 of the major campaigns during the war, one of them being D-Day. What was that like to experience that? I can't imagine being so young as well.
Well, it's only now I'm older I think to myself, I'm glad I did that, but when you're that age and you're on a ship with a load of lads of your own age and better, you know, you're more curious than afraid, and you're always wondering what the next landing will bring. It's bound to be different, because all the different landings are different. D-Day, to me, was, well, I always felt nothing could happen to me, I'll be honest with you, because there was that many ships on the water, and when you read books, I take it somewhere around about 3,000, which sounds ridiculous, but when you seen the Armada sailing for France and you was looking around, there was that many ships, it was a job to see any water. And you thought, oh, nothing can happen to us. I will admit, we were proved wrong to a point, because we got there and I was on Sword Beach as it happened, and we went in with the second wave at about 10:30, and we were on the beach all day then waiting. We unloaded our cargo and we had to wait till the tide came in. And so we were getting shelled, and they had bombing now and again. It was, I'm not saying I was frightened, because I was on a gun, you see, so I always was in the thick of it, so to speak. I was able to take my mind off of what was going on by firing my gun. And while I was firing, it was, you know, hard to say, but no. I'm glad I joined up, I'll be honest with you. I'm proud to have served in the Navy, and I don't regret one little bit.
Well, you should be incredibly proud of the contribution and everything you did. Well, we're going to be catching up with you just a little bit later, if that's okay. You're going to the Field of Remembrance, aren't you? And so we've got to just leave it there for now. But is that okay if we come with you to that? Is that okay? So we'll bring you more later, because we're going with John and Jim to the Field of Remembrance at Westminster Abbey, where John would like to pay his respects there.
That's absolutely fantastic. And Lisa, if I can just ask you, if John doesn't mind divulging to the nation, how old is he?
Oh, do you mind answering this? Tom's asked what some people might not want to answer. How old are you?
99.
99.
I thought it was 99. Wow. Well, Lisa Hartle, thank you so much for bringing us that. And what a vivid, incredible story. We're really, really lucky to be able to hear it firsthand. We'll be back with Lisa later in the day, and of course, John as well. But just to break away from that for a moment, there have been some shocking developments in central London. Clashes have broken out between police and groups attempting to reach the cenotaph. A large crowd of people bearing St George's flags was seen walking along the embankment, shouting "England till I die," as they tried to break through police lines. So this is very interesting. This isn't pro-Palestinian protesters being rowdy. This appears to be people brandishing England flags, perhaps thinking that they're doing the right thing, perhaps thinking that they're going to protect the cenotaph, but actually causing trouble themselves. I'm joined in the studio by Esther, Phil and Simon Danchuk as well. Esther, how concerned should we be about people perhaps thinking they're doing the right thing for their country, but actually disturbing the peace?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen all the footage there. I don't know what's made them want to march onto the cenotaph, and I hate that when you only see a little bit of the story and all unfold, but absolutely. Now, you could say they've been so riled up over what's been happening, and that's why I felt there was very much a tinderbox sort of feeling of today, and that's what we were all concerned about, because so many people were so upset what might have happened, this protest, fifth week consecutive, this Palestinian protest, this pro-Palestinian march, and people came out wanting to defend our country. So that was always the cause of concern. We'll have to see what's happening, what has triggered this situation. I think that's really important to find out.
It does look like there's a police operation there that is making sure that this group doesn't burst its way onto Whitehall. It looks like they're by the Ministry of Defence.
But the police are there. I think that looks good. They're good. The numbers, they were quick, and that's what we want, a quick, responsive, forceful police force.
Simon, what do you make of this latest development?
I was looking at some of this on social media before I came into the studio, and the impression is that some people on the far right, very far right of politics, have come down, as you say, to try and protect the cenotaph. But this is the whole reason for not having the protest on this particular day, the Palestinian protest, because there will be a small number, as we've seen for the last few weeks, a small number of extremists within the pro-Palestinian protest, and now we've got a small group of far-right extremists, and I think it's almost inevitable that there will be clashes at some stage during the day in central London. Now, the extent of them will determine whether the Chief Police Commissioner has got it right or called it wrong. It's all to be seen.
all to be seen, and I suppose as we were looking at those images on Hyde Park, where the pro-Palestinian protesters are gathering, it doesn't seem like there's a huge number. Perhaps we're going to escape some of the worst fears of what today could have looked like, Phil.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, the crowd did look sparse. I guess there's time for people to join. I don't know, they might be somewhere else. Well, look, I mean, you don't want to see any... It doesn't matter who's causing disorder. Look, today should be about a quiet, sombre reflection about people who sacrificed everything for our freedoms. And I don't care whether people are football hooligans or pro-Palestinian people. You do not want to see any people trying to break through...
Do you know what I was going to say? I could see that interview of John, 99 years old,
yeah, exactly.
on a loop, constantly being played, how stoic he was, how matter-of-fact he was. Yeah. I loved the juxtaposition of him at the age of 17 as a gunner on the Navy. There was that youthful naivety about him. And then as an older man there, you know, wise, who's seen it all. I mean, that is what I think great British people are about. None of this weak wokery, none of this protesting and shouting. What he did for his country. And he said, I've been there, I've seen it, but I'm proud that I did it. Have him on a loop all day. Bring him in the studio.
We will certainly be back with John, because I think that's
they don't make them like that anymore, do they?
It's what's so special, perhaps, about the moment in time that we live in. It won't be forever that we're able to hear stories first-hand from people who were there on D-Day. As John was saying, so many ships that he couldn't see any water. Those first-hand stories, we now can't have them from the First World War. We can have them from the Second World War, but we won't have that forever.
But the fact of the matter, well, they didn't care about his birth certificate. They just checked his teeth. How was his teeth? They probably would have given him an iodine tablet or whatever it was. They would have given him a couple of aspirin. I remember seeing what some of the people who went into both the First World War and the Second World War got as they went off to war. It was a little band-aid. It was a tiny little box, a little band-aid, a little plaster. And they say, oh, my goodness, they're going to serious war, and that's what they were given. And my goodness, what a character that John was.
I think you're right, though, Tom. I think it is sad that we're not going to hear those first-hand accounts of what happened in the world wars. And you know, just the quiet stoicism, the humility, the modesty. I mean, it's unimaginable what we asked people to do, and the fact that he just went there quietly and did what he thought was the right thing to do, and was, you know, doesn't regret what he did. You know, how many Johns do we still have in the United Kingdom? You know, I think, you know, that's what today's all about, is remembering people like John.
Well, Phil, you've set me up marvellously for our next segment about remembering things that have gone before.
First
I'm
time
delighted
ever, Tom.
to be
First
joined
time ever.
by Jamie Lonsdale. Now,
good morning,
Jamie.
Tom.
Good morning to you. Now, just explain a little bit about why you're here. Your great uncle is the reason for this.
That's right. So my great uncle was Norman Somerset. He was 20 years old. He had left school and, in the family tradition, joined the Grenadiers. All my family, going way back, have joined the Grenadiers. I broke all the rules and instead joined the Royal Navy.
Just like John did. Just like John did.
Yes. And but Norman Somerset left school, joined the Grenadiers, and was training at Worley. And at Worley, he became great friends with the Prince of Wales, who was also going through his training, so Prince Edward. And I have letters here from the Prince of Wales to Norman, and on October the 4th, 1914, Norman gets sent across the Channel to Ypres, and I have all his things in the cabinet.
Are you going to show us any?
Yes, you've got letters with you here.
Yes, I have. I thought it would be quite interesting for people to actually see these letters. I'm not going to try reading them out because
it's quite
the writing...
sprawling handwriting.
Yes. So this is effectively letters. This is a letter from the Prince of Wales to Norman's parents. So,
what were the sentiments of the letters?
Well, the first letter is the Prince of Wales writing to Norman saying, can we meet for dinner? I'm so sorry. It's from Wellington Barracks, crossed out, and instead written in hand, Buckingham Palace. I'm so sorry that I couldn't make dinner tonight. Tomorrow we have a long march, and then hoping to go for a capital swim at the Bath Club. And so this was very much part of the training, working very hard, long marches. On October the 4th, Norman gets sent across to Ypres. I've got hand-scribbled pencil letters home to his mother. Dearest Mama and Papa, today we saw the enemy for the first time, and we chased them down the road.
Wow.
Now, I mean, they had no idea what they were in for.
This is before we got stuck into trench warfare. This is right at the start.
Right at the very beginning. This is the first Battle of Ypres. There were 5 battles of Ypres, and we had 1 million casualties.
Wow.
But this particular one lasted a month, and we lost 58,000 men. And so shocking. And for Norman, he was expecting to be home for Christmas.
Yes.
As they all were. They thought, you know, it would be a skirmish and return. Unfortunately, on the 23rd of October, things were not going well for the Grenadier Guards, and Norman was tasked with returning to the left wing. And the commander said, leave your rucksack here, because you'll be coming back, and I want you to give a message to the left wing and tell them to withdraw, and use the bicycle. There's a bicycle there. Find the bicycle and bring it back. And it was when Norman went in search for the bicycle, he was 6'6", and the enemy snipers always knew who the officer was, because he was invariably over 6 foot. And unfortunately, he got taken out. He got shot just above the left eye, beneath the eyebrow. And strangely, I have the bullet.
Oh, my.
Wow.
Yeah.
How?
It's a miracle that I have it. And the blessing is that he was killed instantly.
Yes. And I suppose another strange blessing there, that he didn't have the 4 years that ensued of trench foot and ultimate horror, seeing he never saw the scale of what was to come.
That's right. I'm so glad to have his rucksack for all the contents.
Well, what was in it? What was in his rucksack?
Things like tobacco tin.
Yeah.
Princess, I think, was she Princess Alice?
You'd know better than me.
Gave every serving soldier a tobacco tin of 2 packets of cigarettes as a Christmas present.
And the bit I talked about where I saw their medical kit, it really was basic. It was something like, you know, like a plaster. It was like an aspirin. It was so basic considering the enormity of what they were going to see. Did you have his little medical tin in there?
Not his medical tin.
Yeah.
But the great thing is I have a lot of his letters, and in particular here, the Prince of Wales, the moment in fact, Queen Mary was the first to write to Norman's parents. And I've got her letter here saying, you know, Dear Captain Somerset, it's dated November the 1st, 1914. Wow. So very shortly after his death.
Can you tell us how this relates to a piece of music that you've brought in?
Well, I must say that every year as a boy I went to Remembrance service with my grandmother. And I always noticed that she would cry in the service. And so I started to really feel for her, and in doing so, feeling for Norman, who was painted posthumously in our dining room. And the last few years, I started to write songs, about 5 years ago, and 3 years ago I wrote a song for my great-uncle Norman called Off to War. A year later, it seems to have become a habit now at Remembrance, I wrote a song called White Doves of Peace, which I recorded with the Chelsea pensioners, which is crying out for more peace in the world.
Now, I believe we've got a clip of that song that we can listen to now.
The Naval Hymn. This year, the Naval Hymn.
Rock and tempest, far and full, protect them wheresoever they go. And ever let their eyes to be the hint of praise from land and sea.
Oh, it just lifts the heart, doesn't it? Jamie Lonsdale, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it today on Armistice Day.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you.
Now, we must turn to some breaking news. In the last few moments, the Metropolitan Police have issued a statement regarding the clashes that we saw earlier on Whitehall. While the 2-minute silence was marked respectfully and without incident on Whitehall, officers have faced aggression from counter-protesters who are in the area in significant numbers. The counter-protesters are not one cohesive group. There are different groups moving away from Whitehall towards other parts of central London. Officers are keeping track of them as they do. If their intention is to confront the main protest departing later today from Park Lane, we will use all the powers and tactics available to us to prevent that from happening. That's the latest statement from the Metropolitan Police. Let's cross now to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who is at the start point of the Palestinian March. And Mark, is it surprising that perhaps the first clashes that we've seen today have been from counter-protesters?
Not really, I don't think. It's a multi-pronged challenge that the Metropolitan Police are facing. They've always said that, and of course there are elements, by no means all, but there are elements within the counter-protests who are also out potentially to cause trouble as well. As the police said, though, this is not one cohesive group. There are lots of different people that are represented from different groups, and some are less favourable and friendly towards the police than others. So what I'm told from the Metropolitan Police is that although those incidents were a little bit ugly for a while, they were over very quickly indeed, and those people have dispersed, quite a few of them I think to the pub, but for the time being at least that's less of an issue. However, if some of those counter-protesters do try to make their way up towards this area or even somewhere where this march is heading down, and we'll just show you looking down, we're into the sun a little bit, but hopefully you can see some of those hundreds, now in their thousands, of protesters who have been crossing over into Hyde Park. When this route goes down, if some of those counter-protesters try to meet up with this march, then obviously the police will intervene to try to stop that. The very last thing that they want to happen is to allow the two sides effectively to come together, because that will be a real flashpoint. We just want to give you a quick shot over to our right. Actually, you can see some of the police motorcycles assembling there, because they'll be used, I guess, in a capacity either to sort of escort the march when it begins, or just to zip to locations pretty quickly as well. There are some vans in front of them, but those are just the vans carrying the visible presence, the officers here that are just looking after the march as it assembles. And then of course all the way down the route, as I was saying before, Tom, we've got many hundreds of officers in those police vans inside streets, always in a position to react and respond, as they have been doing already this morning to that little flare-up that happened just a short while ago.
Well, Mark White, thank you very much. We'll, of course, be back to you throughout the day and see how that protest develops. Now, just very briefly, Phil, it seems that that is a growing protest. Mark mentioned thousands. It did look a lot busier.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be a big turnout. I mean, I think it's not going to be as big as the organisers originally asked for. I think they started off with 1 million march. I think it was first called. Then it was 500,000 march. I don't think they're going to get anywhere close to that. But clearly, there's going to be a big crowd, and they could cause trouble.
And a final word to you, Esther.
Glad to see the police there stamping their authority on the situation, stopping any upheaval, upset or what have you. And I think people wanted to see that from the start. Those counter-protesters were sort of there saying, we'll protect the cenotaph. The police should have made it clear they were there to do that.
Well, it's good to see that policing working. That's it from us and our special Remembrance Day, Armistice Day programme. I just want to leave you with some words from Rupert Brooke in his famous poem, The Soldier. If I die, think only this of me, that there is some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. Or perhaps I should say that is forever the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's it from us. Coming up next, it's GB News Saturday with Joel Neeson.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Today is certainly the better half of the weekend for many of us, certainly the one to be getting outside. We are sort of in between systems at the moment with low pressure to the east and the west, so it means for us the winds are relatively light in amongst all of that, and there will be plenty of dry conditions around. A few coastal showers to watch out for. North-eastern Scotland might fringe into parts of north-eastern areas of Yorkshire as well, but plenty amounts of sunshine. The sunshine just turning a bit hazier in the southwest of Wales, southwest England with this wispy cloud pushing its way in, but a fairly fine, crisp autumnal day for most of us. Temperatures around 8 to 11 degrees Celsius. As we head into this evening, though, we're going to start to see this band of rain push its way in from the southwest. Could be heavy at times, and it will then spread its way into southwest England and areas of southern Wales. Turning quite windy as well in amongst all of this. This will bring in milder air, so temperatures just holding up a touch more here, but while we hold on to the clear skies further towards the north and east, a very chilly night to come. Can certainly expect some frost first thing on Sunday morning. Also some fog for all parts of the central belt down into eastern areas of England as well. Could be quite slow to clear, lasting until the middle of the afternoon. This rain band then gradually pushes its way northwards. Actually a second band of rain filtering behind. Again, some heavy pulses at times.